In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Hafide, and welcome everyone to another edition of In Full Zoom. And I'm very proud to welcome our guest this week. He's Mr. John DeFries, who is the president and CEO of the Hawaii Tourism Authority. And of course, we're inviting Mr. DeFries on to give us a little insight into the state of Hawaii's soon to reopen tourism industry. Thank you very much, Mr. DeFries, for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. Much like Guam, here in the islands, much of our economy is driven by tourism. And since the pandemic caused a rather abrupt shutdown in the middle of March, much work has been going on by industry leaders and elected officials to find the appropriate way to restart and resume the industry, which officially will begin on October 15th.
Yeah, before we get into more details about that reopening, I just wanted to give our listeners and viewers just a little bit more about you and your background. I know you've only recently been taking over the helm over at HTA, but you have a tremendous amount of experience in the tourism industry. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Oh, sure. No, I'd be happy to. I've been on the job now for about 26 days, but who's counting? You feel like, I feel like I've been at this my entire life. I was born and raised in Waikiki, about 2 blocks from the beach and about a half block, for those familiar with the layout, about a half block from the zoo. So, it was quite a place to grow up. Our family used, Waikiki Beach is known for its recreational value, but as a Hawaiian family, those were our fishing grounds. And every weekend, my uncles and cousins would go out fishing, and what we caught, we ate the following week. And that was a lifestyle we had really in the neighborhoods at that time. And this would have been in the mid 50s through the 60s, and really before the major hotel construction had started. So Waikiki felt very much like a local neighborhood, and it was a great place to grow up. Right after that, in the 70s, I got into the tour and travel end of things. I was a tour director. In 73, would take tour groups from island to island. Thoroughly enjoyed that. And that particular job kind of gives you a very granular understanding of the industry because you're dealing with every aspect. The airlines, ground transportation, hotels, activities, and tours. And so at an early start in my career, those components, which are still prevalent in the industry, were deeply embedded operationally in my mind. And then eventually I got into the hotel development side and was an executive with a development company that built the Embassy Suites resorts that are here in Hawaii and what is today the Fairmont on Maui. And so my career has spanned hotel operations, tour operations, conventions planning, construction and development, and everything in between. So, and believe me, I got a call on all of that at this time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Obviously well versed in the tourism industry, particularly in Hawaii. I wanted to ask you, what has been the impact of the pandemic on your state's tourism industry, and what is the current state as we speak now?
I don't have the exact number that was actually, but you've got to envision an industry that last year welcomed more than 10,400,000 visitors. It was the first time the 10 million mark had been achieved. and gross revenues of just over 17.6 billion, which is basically the engine of our economy here. Now, in March, when everything got turned off, it created quite a vacuum that then has a ripple effect. I couldn't give you the exact number of people that have been laid off, but suffice it to say that when something that big and prevalent in an economy comes to a halt, you begin to feel it in all of the micro enterprise, small businesses, all of that ripple effect, and the absence of disposable income from the general public, has just wreaked havoc here. And we've been fortunate that the federal government, U.S. government, had initially come out in response with a subsidy package that has helped. And unfortunately, those benefits are beginning to expire, and there is an apparent gap of U.S. Congress' inability to follow that up on a timely basis is now going to leave a substantial gap of maybe 3 to 4 months in which, I expect many communities, many families to feel even increased pressure financially because of that.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Yeah, you're telling a story that is very similar to what we're experiencing here on Guam. Is Hawaii also experiencing this division between the best interests of the community health-wise and people who are still fearful of the virus, and the business community who are fearful for their livelihoods?
We are, and if we envision the community as a circle, 360 degrees, and there is an inherent polarity between pro-business and the opposite end of the spectrum, right? And so every decision that's made by the governor or the 4 mayors, or even myself for that matter, inside that polarity, it's going to be controversial, right? I mean, there are going to be those on the pro-business side that believe we're moving too slow. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, there's a concern we're moving too fast. And what I would say is what those opposite poles have in common is the general health and well-being of the community. And some express it related to health, and others see part of a healthy community being a thriving economy, right? And because of the symbiotic relationship between our health and well-being and our financial well-being, you can feel that polarity quite pronounced here in the islands. And right up until the 15th and beyond, frankly, there's going to be intense community debate and disagreement about the steps that are being taken.
Yeah, you mentioned the 15th. That is when the state of Hawaii is planning to reopen its tourism industry. Can you tell us how you guys arrived at that decision?
Sure. Basically, the industry was never really formally turned off. I mean, we've had a trickle anywhere from 1,000 to 1,900 visitors a day. I think yesterday we had just north of 1,900 as these arrivals are being charted. However, when you arrived, you were required into Honolulu to enter a 14-day self-quarantine. Effective the 15th, you will be able to take a certified test within 72 hours of the departure of your flight And if you test negative 72 hours prior to your departure, upon arrival, you will be required to furnish that test result. And if you're negative, you proceed on with your vacation or your business trip. And if you're positive, you would be required to quarantine yourself. So it's this pre-travel test that has been inserted to try and filter the influx of COVID positive folks. And then the other thing too is that each of the counties has a metrics of its own, because each of them has a different capacity to deal with COVID cases. And so from a business perspective, we would love for this to be a uniform, set of conditions and rules. But the reality is, when you have multiple islands with varying levels of concern and hospital capacity, you really need to rely on the individual mayors from those counties to determine what would be the right threshold for their community on it. But those programs begin on the 15th. I should add that that's primarily people arriving out of the United States. Individually, there are tests, for instance, in Japan and other foreign markets that are having to become certified by our local state health department, and to some degree with the US Federal Food and Drug Administration. So that's taking a little more time. Japan is probably further ahead, but any of the inbound markets will be required to have a test that is certified and provided by an agreement between a trusted test provider.
Yeah, and one of the differences between Guam and Hawaii's tourism industry is that you have visitors arriving from both the East and the West, and we have mostly coming from the Asia side. And as you were saying, you don't anticipate those visitors to come back as soon as you expect the mainland visitors, correct?
That's correct. I do expect Japan to be immediately behind. As we speak, I just got an update this morning that the draft agreements between Hawaii and Japan have been finalized, and so there's some final paperwork. So we may be days away from having a authorized agreement between both governments, Japan and Hawaii, and at which time the Japanese traveler will be able to enter the state.
And that you're referring to what I understand is a bubble agreement. Is that correct? Could you explain what that is?
The bubble agreement with Japan was something that was first introduced in June, maybe late May, around June, because at that time both places were actually doing very well with low COVID positive statistics. And right about the time that they started to, between Japan and Hawaii, started to agree that operating within a bubble that might be safer than going to other places in the world, that might work well for both Japan and Hawaii. Like within days, Japan experienced a spike upwards of COVID cases, and within weeks, Hawaii did the same. And that was unfortunate, and it was, the idea was suspended. So what's going on right now, there are elements to it that resemble what the bubble would have been, but the way this is now being constructed is really moving toward restoring the procedures and processes that were there before pandemic hit. Only now you have this pandemic requirements that are overlaid between Japan and Hawaii.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
You mentioned earlier about the testing requirements, and one of the things that's been discussed here with the Guam Visitors Bureau, the Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association, is the importance of safety, portraying Guam as a very safe place for tourists. How important is that for the state of Hawaii?
You know, it's extremely, I cannot emphasize more the importance of the safety of the workforce and the local community, because if there is a breakdown in that, then the work environment could become unsafe. The home at which the employee lives or the neighborhood is at risk. So much attention needs to be placed on the worker. Now, having said that, I've had a chance to speak to some of the workers. Is if I got laid off in March, let's say I was a bellman in the hotel, and I got laid off in March and I got rehired last week in preparation for October 15th. What's really important for everyone to understand is that I'm not returning to the same job. All of the job descriptions and procedures that I had in March and previous to March are still embedded in my department. But I now have to learn a whole new echelon of sanitation, sterilization, hygiene, at standards that heretofore one would find in a clinic or a hospital, right? And then in addition to that, I need to become very knowledgeable, because there's going to be 100 questions, being asked constantly by the visitor. And so I really do need to get a different mindset, that I'm not just being rehired back into what once was, that this is a new environment. It's an environment where we need to take care of our coworkers, take care of ourselves, take care of the work environment, take care of the visitor, and then educate the visitor on how the visitor can take care of us as a place and as a people by acting more responsibly.
Yeah. In addition to the government resources, how closely has HTA been coordinating with the Hotel Association, with the airlines, the ground tour operators?
There is a Go Hawaii website, and on it, you can see the different standards that have been set by each of the airlines, the ground transportation companies. We have two major hotel associations, the American Hotel and Lodging Association, which tend to be the bigger global brand names. But those same global brand names also are members of the Hawaii Lodging and Tourism Association. The latter association also includes ground transportation activities, airlines. So they've got a bigger membership beyond just hotels. So the standards have been set, are available for the consumer and the general public to review. I expect those businesses to use that as a baseline for compliance, and leading up to the 15th and beyond the 15th, I expect those business enterprises to continue refining these standards, because they're going to learn a lot once everybody's back in the work environment, and just continue to make refinements that'll make the place safer and healthier.
Yeah. What is your realistic expectation once you do open for the numbers? I know Hawaii, like Guam, we're riding record numbers. I mean, Guam's tourism numbers aren't quite as huge as Hawaii's, but we were still, before this pandemic hit, we were riding on record numbers. What is your realistic expectation for when these guys come back?
Yeah, good question. So a year ago, if I took 10,400,000 visitors and averaged it out over 365 days, I'd come out with a daily average of about 29,000. So if you use that, it's kind of a broad brush to use, but just use that number. I've been asked this question, and my sense is between the 15th of October and New Year's Eve, during that 2.5 month period, my guesstimate, and this is literally being pulled from the air, is going to be a daily average of around 5,000, or about 17% of where we were a year ago as a daily average. It's a starting point upon which, we would hope that we could continue to build to 20%, 25% of it. And so much of it is going to be dependent on our ability as a destination and as a community to flatten the COVID curve permanently. I mean, at one point, we're going to all have a vaccine that will help us sustain that, but that could be 9 to 12 months away, depending on who you listen to. And waiting for the vaccine is not an option. We literally are going to have to get into almost a competitive mindset about proactively doing what we can to flatten that curve. And the basics: wearing a mask, social distancing, minimizing the size of the crowds, and being compliant with the guidelines issued by government. Those are the things that us as members of the public can all do and have some control over. Because if we're unable to flatten the curve permanently, then you get into this terrible pattern of opening for a month, opening for 5 weeks, and then having to close again, right? And I might add that the most recent spike in COVID cases occurred around early July into the month of August, mid-September, at a time when the visitor really wasn't an issue. It really, though that particular spike can be attributed to us as local residents who may have become complacent, may have become fatigued with, having to work from home and the loss of liberties that we once had. But for whatever reason, we lost a leading edge that we were enjoying in the early summer. And we're just going to have to reset the way we think about this and be vigorous and be proactive about it.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
GU Self-Storage, conveniently located near the Harmon McDonald's. We offer affordable rates, online payments, and auto bill pay for your convenience. Plus gate access daily from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Call us today at 648-7867 for more information.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.
Yeah. And finally, Mr. DeFries, other than, the changes in the health standards and those other things associated with a pandemic, is Hawaii going to change the way it's marketed? Is there going to be any sort of fundamental or major change in the way you try to sell Hawaii to the world?
The near-term answer and the long-term answer is yes. Near term, there's a big responsibility we feel in educating the visitor on pre-arrival and post-arrival on how to be more mindful and sensitive in doing their part to keep this virus from spreading. I think longer term, now that the engine, the industrial engine has been turned off since March, this has spurred a number of conversations in the community, some of which are facilitated by Hawaii Tourism Authority. I actually think that communities are going to end up defining what kind of tourism they feel is better suited for their community, and also guidelines that will keep overcrowding, drive time traffic. They're on the way to 10,400,000. We ended up creating certain hotspots where the visitor and the resident are beginning to collide. And we have the means by which to manage those things and identify it. But I see a whole different attitude in our communities about recognizing what the importance of the revenue potential of having tourism be a part of their community. But I also see a orientation toward a better quality of life and well-being that needs to be factored in to the community equation as well. So we've got our work cut out for us. We're not going to get back to 10 million anytime real soon, if we ever get back to 10 million. So we've got the time to reimagine and kind of reinvent what we'd like to see. And I'm confident in the community and the leaders in the community to come up and find a balance that will work for the industry and keep it economically viable and work for the community as well.
And finally, before I let you go, you are still optimistic about the tourism industry for the state of Hawaii?
I am. I mean, I'm like born and raised into it. I do see a much more enlightened traveler in the future. You've got to, if you're going to pay a premium to travel anywhere in the world, and we're all going to have to pay a premium because there are these added costs associated with our safety and health. If that's the case, then you need a real clear understanding of what is the value of going to Hawaii and paying that premium. And I think that's where the authentic community experiences, a more authentic experience with Hawaiian culture and cultural exchange. I think that's kind of where the future is. And so I actually see kind of a more mindful traveler that is clear about why they're making choices to go anywhere in the world, much less Hawaii.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your time. Mr. John DeFries is the president.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. John DeFries, as I was saying, is the president and CEO of the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and the state of Hawaii will make I guess, a kind of a reopening, even though their tourism ministry has been open, but a big splash coming on October 15th. Best of luck, sir. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All the best to all of you in Guam. Take care.
All
Aloha.
right. Thanks for joining us. I'm Nestor Licanto. We'll see you again next week on In Full Zoom.
In Full Zoom is presented to you by Calvo Enterprises, Inc.